Hello, everybody. Good evening. My name is Jason Levitt, and I'm the Vice President of the Native American and Indigenous Peoples Association here at Furman. With me is Morgan Locklear, our president. This event is a major project we've been working on for the past several months, and we're very excited to finally bring it to you tonight. Before we get started, I'll go ahead and read the standards of comportment for all our CLP events that we have here. CLP events are part of the university's Cultural Life program, which provides opportunities for students to participate in a variety of educational and enriching cultural experiences. Through these events, students encounter a spectrum of issues, ideas, opinions, and artistic expressions from various disciplines and cultures. CLPs invite the views and opinions expressed in this program, and those of the speakers do not necessarily reflect the views of positions of the university. All participants are expected to display respect for the presenters, performers, and audience members, keep an open mind in the presence of new ideas and opinions, and conduct themselves with civility. In turn, all presenters are also expected to encourage productive and responsible conversation consistent with the mission and values of the university. Before each event begins, please silence all electronic devices.
Sorry. All right, so on behalf of both of us, welcome and thank you all for joining us. We're thrilled to see so many of you here for this event. We'd also like to extend a special thank you to the partners who made this possible: the Institute for the Advancement of Community Health, the Riley Institute, and Furman University's Sociology, Religion, and Health Sciences departments. Your support enables us to bring important discussions on health, culture, and community to our campus. Additionally, we acknowledge that Furman University resides on the ancestral lands of Indigenous peoples. We honor the legacy and contributions of those who came before us and express our respect and gratitude to the Indigenous communities past and present. We will now read the official Furman land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that Furman University occupies traditional land of the Cherokee people, a land where the Catawba and other Indigenous people might also have found food. Long before our alma mater sang of the mountain river that laves our mother's feet, the Cherokee honored that water, the land through which it flowed, and all the creatures living on the land with them. From the natural world, they also learned to live and form communities of respect. It is with gratitude that we too honor the land and the people who have stewarded it through many generations. We also must acknowledge that we benefit from the Cherokees' loss of land and commit to remembering the human cost of colonialism. This land acknowledgement challenges us to learn from the Cherokee people and to draw from their wisdom about community, resilience, and the meaning of life which this land nurtured.
And now we will introduce our speakers. We are pleased to have Dr. Kristy Maher as our moderator for this evening's event. Dr. Maher is a professor of sociology at Furman University. She earned her undergraduate degree in sociology from St. Michael's College in Vermont, followed by an MA and PhD in sociology from Yale University. Her research focuses on medical sociology, social determinants of health, and health disparities, and she has led study away programs to Southern Africa, Cuba, and Denmark to explore global health inequalities and happiness. Dr. Mahar's most recent research examines the impact of the medical legal partnership on caregivers of pediatric patients. In addition to her teaching and research, she serves as Prisma's Health Science Director for Furman, fostering collaborative research between Furman and Prisma Health.
All right. And we'd like to welcome Dr. Ronnie Bell. So Dr. Ronnie Bell is an enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe located in North Carolina. He currently serves as the Fred Eshelman Distinguished Professor and Chair of the Division of Pharmaceutical Outcomes and Policy at the Eshelman School of Pharmacy, UNC Chapel Hill. His research addresses health disparities and chronic diseases with a focus on rural and Native American populations. His research has been extensively funded by the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control. Since joining UNC in December 2022, Dr. Bell has continued to prioritize health equity in his work, advocating for culturally competent healthcare approaches for underserved communities. Dr. Bell co-leads the Southeastern American Indian Cancer Health Equity Partnership, a unique collaboration across NCI-designated comprehensive cancer centers in North Carolina that brings research, education, and community engagement to address cancer health needs in American Indian communities. He also serves as chair of the North Carolina American Indian Health Board and contributes to the North Carolina Advisory Committee on Cancer Coordination and Control, where he co-chairs the Prevention Subcommittee. Prior to his role at UNC, Dr. Bell held positions at the Wake Forest School of Medicine as Professor of Social Sciences and Health Policy, Professor and Chair of the Department of Public Health at East Carolina University, and Director of the Maya Angelou Center for Health Equity at Wake Forest School of Medicine. His extensive career in academic and public health settings reflects his commitment to bridging healthcare gaps and promoting health equity for Native American and underserved communities.
And in the middle here, we have Dr. Marcos Moreno. He is an enrolled member of the Pascayaki tribe located in Arizona. He currently serves as the Chief Psychiatry Resident at the Yale School of Medicine and is also a Public Psychiatry Fellow. Dr. Moreno earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Neuroscience and Human Development from Cornell University and his MD from the University of North Dakota School of Medicine and Health Sciences. He has published extensively on topics such as substance abuse, social media addiction, neuropsychiatry, and health policy related to COVID-19 and environmental health. He has also been involved in health needs assessments and quality improvement projects for Native American communities and has participated in medical mission trips to Africa and Latin America with the Global Medical Brigades. Outside of his position at Yale, Dr. Moreno serves as an advisory board member for the Wasahaja Moctezuma Center for Native American Health at the University of Arizona. He has received numerous prestigious awards, including the National Udall Healthcare Award and the Solomon Cook Award for Engaged Research and Scholarship. Dr. Moreno's dedication to advancing healthcare and public health for underserved communities is further demonstrated by his selection for national fellowships, including the Ginsberg Fellowship and many others. Thank you all for being here tonight. And before we begin with our discussion, we have one more introduction.
Lastly, we're honored to have Dr. Helen Lee Turner with us this evening to provide a brief introduction on Native American health. Dr. Turner is a professor of religion at Furman University, where she teaches several courses on Native American religion and culture. Her expertise will offer valuable insights as we explore the important topics of health in Native American communities. I will now turn it over to Dr. Turner.
Good evening. It's an honor to be part of this program. Our Native American and Indigenous student group is not large, but they are committed to making the story of America's first people known, and I'm very proud of their work. It's important work because in the area where we live, Native people seem to be mostly in the history books, or we think that's the case. And I think it's important for us to their work in helping you know that Native people are still here, some of them not too far away. But it's not like where I take some trips. And so one of the things I'm going to do tonight is begin with a commercial. We have a MAEX program going to the Hopi and Navajo reservations in the Pueblos, and maybe we'll visit the Yaqui this year as well. And we also have a course this spring that still has seats, Navajo Views of the Body, Medicine, and Health. And there is a new course on the Plains culture in the history department, offered again this spring. And there is a course on Native American politics in the politics department. So we've gone many years without Native American courses, and we now suddenly have a few, and I'm very excited about them. So I just thought that was important for you to know. And by the way, the Navajo medicine course has no prerequisites, and it counts for the medicine, health, and culture minor. In this last part of my career, I've been at Furman over 40 years, I have undertaken 2 new areas of work. And I think these are more important than any other work I have done. They are Native American studies and the relatively new field that focuses on the intersection of religion and health. And I have found particular joy in thinking about questions of meaning, ethics, and health in Indigenous cultures. Indigenous people, not just in the Americas, but around the world, have very much to teach us. And I'm not just talking about traditional herbal medicines, though there is that to consider as well. I'm not going to talk long because you can talk to me another time, but I thought I would begin with maybe a little statement of overview of how Native American perspectives on these things might, in the big picture, be different from what has been modern Western views. So there are a number of ways this conversation tonight might go, and I don't know exactly what topics we might go to before we're done, but one thing is for sure, there is a difference in sort of ontological perspective in modern Anglo culture and in traditional Native cultures. In modern Anglo society, what appears most basic is the individual. But for most indigenous cultures, relationality is basic. Relationality, even within the individual person, is key. While modern Western medicine has begun to talk about the whole person in more recent years, that is not new among Native people. Health has never been just about our bodies, making our bodies operate like a well-oiled machine. Our bodies are not separated from our minds and our hearts, and individuals are not separated from their communities. Kinship involves not only relationship with families and neighbors, but also with the natural world, and kinship is necessary for good health. When we are on the Navajo reservation, one friend there says, if somebody misbehaves, we always say, you're acting like you don't have any family. Everybody is kin. Everything, including how you understand illness and health and how you make health decisions, are seen through the lens of community. So those my brief intro that I think kind of opens up traditional Native perspectives. I don't know whether that fits with what you all are going to talk about, but I thought that would be a good place to start. Thank you very much. We look forward to hearing you.
I guess I should have checked the mic, but you can hear me, yes? Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really excited and feel privileged to be part of this conversation this evening. I'm going to do my best to address a variety of issues and give you an opportunity to respond. So the first question I have is that recognizing that each tribe is a unique group and health is a very complex matter, the intersection of Native culture and health becomes a really broad topic. So I want to try to focus our conversation a bit by giving you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about who you are. My question is, why, in addition to your tribal identities, are you drawn to health concerns of Indigenous people? And what issue do you find most compelling? Whoever wants to start.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. So for me, and just to kind of give you the bird's eye view of like why this became something that I wanted to pursue and have always been interested in. I was born and raised on the Bosque Yaqui Reservation in southern Arizona. We're a small community about 30 minutes away from the US-Mexico border. Growing up, I was super tied to culture. I got the benefit of, growing up in our tribal school system that was really big on teaching tribal cosmology, language, religion, stories. But more than that, like the community and like that connectedness. And this is something that I think, is shared among all Native people. It's that the community is a huge important factor in how you're kind of raised. That saying, raised by a village. It's true. Like for thousands of years, that's kind of how we were doing it. You may have had two parents, but you have multiple people who are supports. And for me, growing up in the culture, doing tribal ceremonies, that was a group for me that really brought me in, that tied me in. And, growing up, medicine was always kind of the goal. I always did want to end up in psychiatry, I think, but I always
was passionate about, bringing people together and having that communal aspect into medicine. I, in my very rudimentary understanding of things early on, thought, the brain is the best organ. We're going to fix it by giving you some medicine that fixes the brain. We're going to cure addiction, trauma, depression, all that just by giving you medicine. And what I've come to learn is the medicine is more than just like the substance or the medications we're trying to prescribe. It's much more than that. There's a whole host of factors that extends to the community, the environment, that really goes to be the medicine. Exercise is medicine. Food is medicine. Your family is medicine. And how we bring that all together is really how Indigenous people have been looking at wellness and medicine for millennia. That's broadly kind of how I'm connected to it and why I'm passionate about it.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight and to share a little bit about my perspectives on some of these issues. And I'll just give you the caveat, as a college professor, not having PowerPoint slides is a little unnerving for me, so I'll do my best here. But I grew up in a tribal community in eastern North Carolina. The Lumbee tribes, and Morgan and I are from the same tribe. And I would echo a lot of the things that have already been said, that community, that connectedness, that relationship is very important. It's, one of the things that I did, I asked Morgan, who's her family? And so, making that family connection is very important. We just recently did a project with Native youth, and we did I don't know if you're familiar with what's called Photo Voice, but it's a means to gather information about different issues, and you give the participants in your study cameras and a journal, and so you say, go out in your community and capture images and perspectives on. And so we were talking about cancer, and so we were when we were working with these youth, and going out with that very broad charge to them, one of the first things they did was they took pictures of the river in the community, so that connection to nature. They took pictures of their relatives, their church, all of those things that were important to them. And so, us in the medical field, when we think about, the certain things like environmental pollutants and cigarettes, but the things that really were important to them from a health perspective was their connection to nature, their connection to their spirituality, their connection to their family. And so for me, I think the reason why I do what I do, and my my 30 plus years in this field, I've been able to look at a lot of different health issues. And unfortunately, part of the reason why I am able to do that is because if you look at, if there is data available for American Indians, a lot of times that data indicates that American Indians have the poorest outcomes for those health conditions like diabetes, like cancer, like cardiovascular disease. There was a study that was done last year where they showed that Native American people had two times higher reduction. If that makes sense. So their life expectancy for Native people dropped by twice as much during the early years of COVID compared to the general population. And so you look at something like that and say, that's incredible. That one population group would have such a poor outcome for this, major public health epidemic that occurred. But if you think about it, all of the factors that we sort of now know in hindsight that contributed to increased risk for getting COVID, for getting hospitalized for COVID, for dying from COVID, all of those things are prominent in most of the Native communities. And so each tribal community is unique. And so we think about there's 574 federally recognized tribes. There's 300 plus non-federally recognized tribes and people groups across the country. Each of them have their own unique history and culture and customs and language and all of that. There are some unifying themes for Native people, but when you're wanting to learn about a tribal community, you can't just make assumptions. You have to really understand what's going on in that community.
Thank you so much. Our first topic is suicide. And as you mentioned, Native Americans often have much worse rates of health profiles and many factors. The CDC recently demonstrated that Native Americans suffer from suicide at much higher rates than the general population. Specifically, they have the highest rate of 27.1 suicides per 100,000 compared to 17.6 for non-Hispanic whites. The data also shows that Native males are impacted at a much higher rate than Native females, with males dying from suicide at a rate of 42.6 suicides per 100,000 compared to 13.8. What factors do you think might be affecting those differences?
I can start with this, and there's some recent data out. I just gave a talk on this last month, actually. Part of the reason why behavioral health for me was always just an easy fit was because this is a huge need for Native Americans across the country. Unfortunately, one of the shared characteristics for Native American communities nationwide is adverse health outcomes regarding mental health. If you look at the chart, and I encourage you all to do this, for suicide rate broken down by racial demographic, you'll see a clustering of like 3 or 4 groups down at the bottom. You'll see white Americans somewhere like around the middle, and then very near the top, not even close, you'll see Native Americans. The rates of suicide in Native communities is it's long been an issue, and it's finally getting a bit more recognition, but it's really alarming actually when you look at the data that's out there. And these kind of deaths in psychiatry, along with like substance abuse, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, but we categorize these as like deaths of despair, things that happen in these communities that are, kind of when people are at a loss and really they feel like they don't have other options or a way to turn. There's a couple reasons for this. Big part of it is health access. So Native Americans nationwide, in part because of their often rural locations, but even when they are urban located, health access for these groups and getting to a psychiatrist, getting to a therapist, getting to even a primary care physician can be very challenging. So often it goes untreated, it goes unchecked until it boils over. The other piece of it that is, really tough, and this is part of the work that I was doing in my own community this past year, is focus on stigma reduction in these communities. Behavioral health stigma is something that is an issue nationwide. This is not just limited to Native communities, but in Native communities, in marginalized communities where health literacy isn't always the best. The idea of reaching out is more daunting, especially for males, because of this idea that it makes you look weak. It makes you look like there's something flawed about you. There's something wrong with you. That is part of the reason why there is also a gender divide in this between males and females. But the other part of that is access and means. So the fact that Native males are more likely to use a firearm is part of the reason why that rate is much higher. I'm not saying this to criticize firearms. I own firearms myself, but there is proven data that suggests when you are closer to being impulsive, when you can just reach for something and grab it, suicide happens primarily in spur of the moment. It's actually not very often that people think out a very elaborate plan and dawn over something. It's very often that people in an impulsive moment do something, and the more dangerous that reaching is, the more unfortunate the outcome and the lethality can be.
That's wonderful. Thank you for breaking that down. I would just add to that. So we, a group of us, when I was at Wake Forest about 10 years ago, we were approached by, we have our tribe has a Native youth program, and it's run through the Boys and Girls Clubs. And so they reached out to us and said, we've been running this program for a long time, but we really want to know whether these programs, the culture programs that they do for the kids in the community, is it having any impact on the mental health of our youth? And so we went in, we wrote a grant, got it funded, and so we worked with them and the youth. They learned about their tribal history. They did beadwork and artwork. We had a powwow for them after the session, the grant was over, and then we had like a little talking circle, and they talked about sort of this. In Native culture, it's important to live in balance. So the physical, the mental, the spiritual, and the emotional, having those things in balance. And when you're not in balance, that's when a lot of these health outcomes can occur. And so these kids in this program, they talked about, and there had actually been a couple of their kids in the community that had committed suicide. And so they talked about this sort of that lack of balance, that not feeling really connected to their culture. And they also talked about like some of the warning signs. So, they talked about kids who had like suicide ideation or non-suicidal self-harm, and some of those things where kids were trying to get the attention of someone because they were hurting. And one of the, to the day I die, I will always remember one of the kids in our group said, because he was talking about cutting himself, and he said, for me, he said, it's easier to hurt on the outside than on the inside, so that's why I cut myself. And you talk about a puddle of tears, but to say something like that, but that was he was expressing that sort of, I think, that lack of balance, that lack of that connectedness. And so that's what you see in a lot of these Native communities.
Thank you for that. In addition to sort of access issues, which you mentioned, and particular struggles, how do you think historical trauma weighs on the mental health of Native Americans?
This is a big one, and this has gained a lot of traction over the years. I'm going to reference a paper for all of you to review at some point. So you're getting homework here, sorry. But I'll give you the synopsis. So one of my colleagues at Yale published a really great overview on this topic called Rethinking Soul Wounds. It's by Stephanie Gilson and David Ross. And it uses the story of Wounded Knee to talk about that massacre and the resulting trauma from that community, and kind of how it's essentially influenced generations beyond those who have, essentially even been around to survive it. It does a great job of talking about this concept of soul wounds and this idea that you carry trauma with you in like that spiritual sense. But it goes a step further, and it proposes a mechanism for how this works at kind of a biological level, which I think is really interesting. This is an animal study, but bear in mind, it poses a plausible mechanism nonetheless. So there's this animal study where they essentially fear condition these mice to a smell. And every time it smells this scent, they give them a shock. They do that until the mice is just scared of the scent alone. And then what they did was they took the genetic material from this mice, inoculated it with another one that had no connection to it. They raised the pups separately from that fear inoculated mouse. And what they found was not only did the offspring of that mice who had no connection to that fear conditioned smell have upregulated olfactory receptors fearing that smell, the grandchildren of that mice also did. There was upregulated genetic markers in the second generation that showed that there was a reason why, despite never being exposed to the same stimulus, that it was essentially carrying trauma within its genetic material. Now, this is an animal study, but that is still jarring to think about, to think that something that your grandparents went through could be affecting your genetic material, can be affecting your epigenetic kind of, coding of things. It's shocking. But it speaks to this because if you look through the history of the US, there are a number of policies which are not that old. The last residential reservation school closed like in the 1970s. Many of your parents were still alive that were being born then. Like, this isn't that old of an idea. And that, coupled with, intentional disease inoculation, with forced sterilization of women in the Indian Health Services, with a host of other like cultural traumas and things that are not far off in that history, it just speaks to the idea that you can have a lot of plausible reason why people are carrying around these soul wounds. I encourage you all to read that paper. It's a great paper. It's a great overview.
And, let's bear in mind, it was just a few days ago, President Biden formally apologized on behalf of the federal government for its role in the residential boarding schools here in the United States. So this is not something that's ancient history. This is something that is very recent, and we can also add sort of the contemporary trauma that's happening to Native women. American Indian women are 10 times more likely to be a victim of a violent crime compared to non-Hispanic white women. So that's not historical trauma, that's contemporary trauma. And we're seeing that among Native women across the country. And so May the 5th every year is the national recognition for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So definitely this is a very important issue. But also, recognizing that, we use that terminology, historical trauma, but there's contemporary traumas that are impacting Native communities as well.
To add to that point, I should also say, when we talk about historical trauma too, on the front of like contemporary trauma and things that are active, when you have those historical traumas, when you already have that predisposition for, having elevated stress related to like, an inciting stressor, trauma is cumulative. The more stressors you have build up, especially with that predisposition, the more likely you are to experience symptomatology from that. And that's something that we're learning more and more about in my field.
Yes, related to mental health and recognizing the role of stress, not only affecting mental health, but physical health. As you mentioned earlier, Native Americans have significantly higher rates of many chronic diseases compared to the general U.S. population. Things like diabetes, high blood pressure, chronic liver disease, cancer, cardiovascular diseases. And this disparity is often attributed to social and historical factors that we've already been discussing. In light of this information, what types of interventions are community partners, practitioners, researchers, healthcare policy makers, what are they currently pursuing? And in your experience, what's been successful?
So one of the things that I think a lot of tribal communities have been trying to get back to is leaning on the community as a strength and really leaning into this idea that the community has its own kind of way of going about something that might be, you might do something differently here in South Carolina versus what you would do in Arizona. I say that because whenever there's a community health intervention or whenever there's like a target population like Native Americans, there's always this kind of this undertone of like homogeneity and thinking that like you're going to apply a one size fits all. And that's not what it is. Every community is going to kind of have their own way of addressing these issues. Specifically for, well documented are, issues with like diabetes and substance abuse in Native communities. What that looks like in my community will look very different than what it looks like in Ronnie's community. I will speak to what I've seen in our own community and how we have really robustly developed our behavioral health system, but also really ramped up our push for wellness and physical wellness by incorporating traditional cuisines, by increasing communal gatherings and kind of exercises that were traditionally based. getting back to the old ways. It sounds kind of cliche, but really incorporating culture into these treatments has shown to be beneficial. And it's something that the American Psychiatric Association, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, they've funded research on this for years. And what they've shown at this point is tribal youth who are involved in ceremonies, culturally connected, have lower rates of substance abuse, have lower rates of completed suicide, have a better connected wellness, and are less likely to feel outcast, feel like an outsider. All to say that that incorporation of a stronger community tie, of getting traditional practices back into the lives of people in this way, is a huge strength and a huge support that needs to be utilized. And it'll look different in every community, but the overarching theme of that being a huge pillar of what's working has been shown and demonstrated.
Yeah, last week I was in Minneapolis at the American Public Health Association meeting, and one of the things that APHA does is they have caucuses, and so there's an American Indian Alaska Native caucus, and so they have sessions where presenters come and talk about the work that they're doing in their communities. And so I was able to present about our Photo Voice project. But one of the really neat things in participating and hearing what other people are doing was that that getting back to those traditional ways. So if you think about the way, traditionally Native people, they ate healthier, they were more physically active, and so thinking about like powwow dancing. I mean, that's a very physically rigorous thing to do, and so you're getting exercise by doing it in a traditional manner. And so there is that sense of getting back to the traditional ways, but there's also the thought of, we use the word resilience a lot now, and so thinking about how communities can become resilient to some of these adverse social determinants that they face, and how can they, in that light, in the communities that they eat, work, sleep, go to school, all of those things, how can they be resilient and live healthy lives? Because nobody wants to be unhealthy. And so, how do you sort of build on that resilience and coming together as a community?
Related to your mentioning of the social determinants of health, and for students who have not taken my class, please come take my class, right? We talk a lot about where people grow, work, age, play, and those being really the root causes of health disparities that we see. So given that we know these are really important to health overall, how can we better address these with underserved communities? If we're thinking about providing quality education, affordable housing, safe working conditions, economic stability, how can we reach those in Native communities that may have been and may currently be underserved?
Obviously, many are presently underserved, and there is a lot of work to go. Reaching those communities, and especially reaching tribal communities that can sometimes be skeptical of outsiders and leery of external intervention because of prior negative and historical interactions with, the U.S. medical system. There is a great, let me see, this would have been in 2021 now. There's a good example of this. So in the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Native Americans were one of the most vaccine hesitant groups in the United States, in part because this kind of felt like a trap. It's like, oh, you want to do what to us now? You're giving us the vaccines first? This feels a little weird. So I dealt with this a lot in my own community, with a lot of people telling me, it's going to kill us. They're just trying to wipe the rest of us out, kind of thing. People really fearful of what this meant, because when vaccines were first allotted, they actually did a lot to Native tribes very early on and said, you guys can distribute it how you want. But there hadn't been a lot of people who had gotten it. So there was a lot of mistrust about its safety, its efficacy, and how well it's going to work, or is it going to do harm? So one of the projects that I engaged with my community was specifically talking about the research that went into this vaccine, that went into the safety profile for it, that looked at its outcomes for people who got sick versus, their healing time, that sort of thing. So we had a video that got put up on social media through all of our tribe's web pages, and basically, I'm coming to them both as like a physician, but also as a community member, as someone who, I'm much more likely to take my neighbor's advice to really put stock in something from someone that I know versus, someone in a white coat who seems disconnected whether or not this is going to hurt the community or not. All to say, tribes are very accepting of the help that they get, but I do think there still has to be a very strong boots on the ground involvement from the community that's there and that interfaces with teams that are working with tribes, because getting reception in that way can be challenging, and having an advocate within the community is huge, and how you do that is going to vary, but the same point sticks, that like if you have someone from the community who's really kind of advocating for that change, that's when you see the benefit. And to kind of capstone what I was talking about with Native Americans having this high rate of vaccine hesitancy, the data that we published, this is an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, you guys can look it up. After the first year of vaccine availability, Native Americans had the highest rate of vaccination against COVID-19, in part because a lot of these community efforts and a lot of these boots on the ground efforts, like really employing the trust of fellow community members, getting the shot on Facebook Live, talking about this like on Instagram and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's excellent point. And I would add to that it can seem overwhelming because there are so many of these adverse social determinants, and just thinking about, I haven't even really talked about, racism as one of those social determinants, and how that impacts Native communities. I mean, the community I grew up in, we had, even though our people from our tribe were, we were fairly predominant in our one community, but our county was almost equally divided among white, African American, and American Indian, and there were places you could go, and I remember this as a kid, where there were three water fountains. There were places where we had to sit in certain places in the movie theater. I have a picture on my phone of a billboard in one of our neighboring communities that says, the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan welcomes you to our community. And so these things have had, traumatic effects. And so finding those ways to have those change agents, to have those vested brokers being a part of developing the solutions with these resilient communities, I think is very important. I just, talking about COVID, in our there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy in our community, and so our tribal chairman took it upon himself to do this series of YouTube videos. He did one with Lumbee healthcare providers. He did one with Lumbee pastors. He did one with Lumbee teachers, and they were all talking about the importance of getting vaccinated, to doing what you can to protect yourself from COVID. And so it takes a lot of effort, but the other thing I will add is our tribe just recently did for those of you who are in public health, communities will do what's called community health needs assessments, and so it'll be a local public health department in the hospital that will come together and gather information from the community through focus groups and surveys, and so it helps those public health and healthcare providers to sort of prioritize, okay, so what is the community telling us are important issues to address? And a lot of times that's just not prioritized for Native people. And so our tribe this past year did their own tribal health assessment. And so they collected almost 1,000 surveys from members of our tribe and asked those questions. What are the key priorities from a health perspective that you see in our community, and how can we best address those? So having that ability to look at the data and listen to the voices of the people, I think, is very important.
Yes. I think whenever we think about social determinants of health, of course, it's a huge issue to think about how to tackle those upstream issues. But I really appreciate your advice on listening to voices, getting stakeholders from the communities on board with you, asking them what they need and want, because sometimes I think people with very good intentions will assume they know before they ask people what might be best for them. And so that's a really wonderful thing to talk about. There is some exciting news happening in our country. Seems hard to say that some days. But in recognizing the role of these traditional health practices that you talked about before, for example, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare and Medicaid Services, for the first time in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oregon, have agreed to reimburse for traditional health practices. Things like music therapy, sweat lodges, and dancing to benefit both physical and mental health. So starting in January of 2025, Indian health service providers in qualifying counties will be part of or be able to be part of a 2-year pilot project for reimbursement. And so I'm interested in hearing your ideas about how these traditional healing practices might be integrated into current treatment models.
Yeah, and it's you know, it's a huge thing to see these kind of things come to fruition, because when I mentioned like the data that's out there that supports this idea that these types of things improve outcomes for Native youth, it's beyond something that has been able to be demonstrated and replicated in literature at this point. Studies have been small, but the fact that we're able to do something like this speaks to one, the volume of people we have wanting to incorporate this, and the fact that there has been a resurgence among a lot of Native communities throughout the U.S. in trying to bring back, for many, what was lost pieces of culture, lost elements of tradition and things that weren't as widespread before. And it's beautiful on 2 levels, because we're getting the medicine piece back, we're getting the community piece back, but there's also a re-strengthening of culture that comes with it. And that's a huge thing. How we incorporate it is definitely going to be a challenge, because we're short healthcare providers. That's just the reality. But I want to point out we're short healthcare providers, in the Western sense. We have a lot of community leaders and elders and people with, generations of traditional knowledge that are wanting to incorporate this and are wanting to be accepted into this space. And I think we as providers, myself included, I'm speaking up here, as someone who's Native, but I'm Western trained. I have an MD. I'm not a curandero, or I don't have like that type of training. But we have to also be more open to this and understand that, even if we didn't learn about it in medical school, there's data out there and research out there that supports this and supports it being efficacious. And having that open mind as, Western trained providers, that's on us. And like, it's on us to call us out when we're being skeptical of things just because it's not familiar to us.
My brother is a pediatrician down in our community, and he trained at UNC Chapel Hill Medical School, went out to Oklahoma and served in 2 tribal communities out there, and came back home and was working in pediatric practice, and was seeing people who were coming in, and when a child is taken to the doctor, you have the mom, the grandma, the auntie. It's a family thing, right? So he oftentimes, people would come in and they would talk about some of the traditional remedies that they were using on their children, and initially, he would say, he was like, he'd feel torn between, well, this is what I learned in medical school, but this is what they're telling me, and so finally, he finally came to the realization, and so he has med students and PA students that rotate through his clinic all the time, and he just he can bring the student in, and he'll have the mother explain what they're doing for their child, and the student will have kind of this puzzled look on their face, and and so my brother's point is like, they don't do this for generations because it doesn't work. They do it because it works. You know, that's a tradition that has been handed down, you know, for centuries. And so, you know, I applaud, you know, the efforts to try to reimburse some of these programs, because I think that could make a huge step in the right direction.
So goes along with your points before about getting tribal leaders and elders on board and sort of melding the two cultures together in a way that's respectful from both sides. As our society does make progress in recognizing Native cultures and the long-lasting impact of colonization, conversations just like these that we're having tonight will help to determine the next steps for empowering Native people. What do you envision for the future of Indigenous cultural preservation? And specifically, what advice would you give to someone who wants to learn more and engage with Indigenous cultures respectfully?
I think for Indigenous cultural preservation, you know, fortunately, we're on the right track. As I mentioned, there's been a resurgence nationwide, and you know, this is something that goes back to, I think even in my lifetime, I've noticed like so many more people, even within my home community, younger generations getting involved with learning the language, learning the cosmology, learning a lot of the origin stories for our community, learning the history. And I think that's where it starts, is understanding kind of where you've been to know where you're going. As anyone who wants to be involved or wants to kind of, you know, be connected, I'd say, you know, you definitely have to go into it with an open mind. You have to definitely go into it with as humble as an attitude as you can, and understand that, you know, there may be some resistance initially, there may be some pushback, and I think a lot of it is, you know, tribes want to protect what's growing and what's there, because there is a dark history. There is a concern over things that have happened in the past. But I do know that there has been, you know, throughout, especially in my area of the country, improved alliances with, you know, local communities and nonprofits who are doing work with tribal communities. And even if they're not native led, they are collaborating with natives. They are definitely keeping the community's perspectives and voices in line with the goals of their projects, whatever they're doing. And I think that's what's most important. There's been a couple people tonight ask me about, you know, what does it look like for someone who's, you know, an outsider going in and working with our communities? We need the help. We need the help. We need all the help we can get, and we're more than willing to accept that. We just, you know, we have to be careful about how we go about things, and it's I think it's something that I would encourage. You know, if you're interested, try to find a way to engage with the community respectfully, keep an open mind, and just be patient. It can take time to develop these relationships, but ultimately we need the help, and we do want it.
My brother that I mentioned, when he has students come to his clinic, he gives them a list of things to read. He said, this is information about our tribal community. I want you to read this. He encourages them to go to a powwow or to a cultural event. He encourages them to go to a tribal council meeting. You can't learn about a community without connecting with that community, understanding what's important to that community, and there's plenty of opportunities to do that. So, and you know, but keeping in mind that you know, don't go into it with just sort of the generalities, that there are unique aspects to each of the tribal communities. So take the time to learn, you know, the history, the culture, the things that are important to that community.
Really exciting to hear about the revitalization of Indigenous knowledge and respect for Indigenous knowledge. A recent article, however, in The Lancet talked about how underrepresented Native Americans physicians are in the field. Specifically, between 1997 and 2017, While enrollment of underrepresented medical students increased, the per capita enrollment of Native American students actually decreased. And in fact, they were the only racial ethnic group with no absolute enrollment measures. For example, in 2022-23, just 1% of medical students identified as American Indian or Alaskan Native, while they made up 2.3% of the US population. Among practicing physicians, there are only 4,104 self-identified American Indians or Alaskan Natives, which is far below the 30,000 needed to match their population proportion. Without significant interventions, achieving parity in the physician workforce remains unlikely. What do you think can be done to increase the numbers of Native Americans working in healthcare, research, STEM careers?
Yeah, it's a great article, actually. My good friend Victor's the one who wrote it. He and I have worked together on a few projects, and we've talked about this. There's a huge gap, obviously, as far as what we need versus what's presently out there. And the other problem with physicians is that it takes close to 12 years to really get you a full-fledged physician ready to practice. And that's 12 years post-high school. So it takes a lot of time. It's very expensive. And it can be very difficult for Native students who, are first generation showing up to a university and, their goal is to be a doctor, and they show up to campus and, they're in a class of 1,000 people, and, the mentor, whoever it is, who's like the guidance counselor trying to help them select this is like, are you sure you're really ready for this? Are you sure you really can do this kind of thing? It's challenging for anybody to become a physician, to come from, that type of environment where you feel like people are going to be skeptical of your abilities. It makes it that much harder. All said, to kind of remedy that, we do need more pathway programs that are going to serve as a pipeline to, help Native students early. Because I think really, if you're trying to catch students and really keep them invested in this, they have to have some exposure. We're talking middle school, high school, showing up to college and just feeling, it's going to be overwhelming for anyone. But if you don't have an understanding of the process and what lies ahead, it's going to be really overwhelming if you show up freshman year and just get all of that information. So I'm a big believer that we need more pathway programs to help increase the number of health professionals, and not just, Native physicians. One of the things that I think is kind of undersold, and I wish I knew more about when I was in middle school and high school, like many people who come from those type of communities, I was aware of 3 career options: being a doctor, a lawyer, being a teacher. That's about it. There are a ton of other health career options in between, being a doctor, being a physician's assistant, being a respiratory therapist. We're underrepresented in all of those fields. And many of those other fields do not take 12 years to become. I'm not saying don't become a doctor, but I'm saying that's not your only option. There's plenty of other health career fields that we're also underrepresented in that we need to fill.
Yeah, and there are a few med schools across the country that are trying to, or they have areas of emphasis for Native students. I know Dartmouth, North Dakota, Arizona. So that has helped, I think. The Association of American Indian Physicians, which is a organization based in Oklahoma City, has programs to try to encourage Native high school and college kids to pursue careers in the medical field. But I would agree. I mean, the PA is a wonderful profession. PharmD. I work in a school of pharmacy. We have 4 American Indian students in our PharmD program right now. So, pursuing degrees in biomedical engineering and all. but again, keeping in mind that, you have to be well prepared, going back to middle school and high school, you've got to be well prepared to step on a college campus, make good grades, be competitive, and then, go on to graduate school. So, and a lot of times, in many of these communities, they don't have a role model. They don't have a point of reference to say, okay, well, I want to be like him or her. And so that does present a lot of challenges. So to the extent that you can put those role models out there, I think that's very helpful.
Speaking about role models, did you have people that were particularly influential in helping you find your way, your path?
I can think of a few different people, and honestly, like the really early people in my life that kind of guided me and kept me on like the right path were not at all related to academics or to medicine. So I was raised as an athlete. I was very involved in like football, baseball growing up. Those are the two biggest sports in my reservation community. And part of the deal was you had to make grades to stay eligible and to keep playing. So early on, coaches were like the biggest source of support for me and the biggest push. I mentioned to you guys I was involved in tribal ceremonies since I was a kid. A lot of those guys in those groups, and even some of the leaders in our cultural ceremonies, they would ask me like how stuff was going for prepping for the ACT or things like that. I was actually at a tribal ceremony the night before my ACT, and I left at like way too late but to go take that test the next morning. Those are like the people I think of as like my mentors that I had back in the day. The one guy who is in the health field or is like a mentor for me, medicine, he's actually the medical director for my tribe. So this guy's been there, going back 30 plus years, was my primary care physician when I was a kid. And he's still the medical director and is nudging me that he wants to retire soon. He is not native. He's not even from Arizona, but he has taken the tribe under his wing and has been like a visionary and a leader for us for many years now. And he's kind of been the one who's really helped me understand some of just like the systems policy level changes and just having that vision for public health and improvement. He's probably like my closest mentor to what I'm doing now, so to speak.
I think for me, I was youngest of three boys in our family, and my older brothers are professionals now. One is a pediatrician, one is a judge, and so just having them as role models was very important for me. There was also a man in our community, Dr. Jim Jones, who recently passed away. He was a family physician, just was a very down-to-earth man, was nationally recognized, helped start the Department of Family Medicine at East Carolina, which is one of the strongest family medicine programs in the country. And so he was somebody who always looked up to and always felt like he was somebody who had lived that life of purpose and was always committed to his community. So
oftentimes minority groups are put in a position where they have to leave their home in order to search for higher education or new opportunities. This is evident among some of our students here at Furman. Recognizing this, how can future generations stay connected to their culture, and how important do you think it is that they do that?
So I left home to kind of delve off into the pathway that I've taken now, and it was definitely a tough experience because you go from always having like a community really kind of near proximity. You're always available to go to ceremonies, to make all the big events, make all the big family gatherings, that sort of thing. Number one, it is ultimately important, and if the one thing that you take away from this talk is that there is research demonstrating that like having that tie to a community, having that connection to a community is beneficial, not just like at the emotional well-being level and mental well-being level, but like, if we look at this in big groups of data, we know that it does well for people. Your community matters, your connection to community matters. So that's huge, and it is hard to do. My tribe has ceremonies that the biggest of them kind of runs like right around Easter. And, from the time I left to all through medical school, I really did try to make an effort to go to all those, to try to make it back for the big things, and to still kind of keep that community presence. But I wasn't always able to. It's not always possible. I mean, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to, live somewhere where it snowed. So I ended up in the opposite corner of the country in Western New York and was flying back to Arizona as often as I could, but it wasn't always possible. And honestly, that's why I wanted to, work with the health department on projects that they had whenever I could, just to kind of keep some connection. I know it's hard. It's challenging, especially like with geographical distance and issues, but however you got to make it work, however often you can go back, keep trying to stay connected, because it is important.
Yeah, at UNC we have was a student group called the Carolina Indian Circle, which has been in existence for about 50 some years, and so I always found it helped me. It helps other Native students. When you have a campus of 30,000 students, and you can have that community of Native students that come together on a regular basis. We also have an American Indian Center at UNC, and they do a lot of programming with our Native students. So, but also I would agree. It's there's so many opportunities. We have a very large powwow in the fall, but there's numerous intertribal powwows. UNC has a powwow in the spring. We also have, this November is American Indian Heritage Month, and so we have a big American Indian Heritage celebration in North Carolina on November. Well, it'll be on November 23rd this year. So, thousands of people come together in downtown Raleigh and celebrate. So those things are just so important and so enriching to the soul.
I just have one last question before we open it up to the audience to see if you have questions. So as we close, what are key steps that you think healthcare providers, policymakers, researchers, and tribal communities can take to ensure that mental health and substance abuse interventions are both effective and substantial and sustainable? But also, what can we do to continue to work to reduce health disparities for Native American populations?
A good answer to that question might get you a Nobel Prize. It's a tough one, and the end all be all of it, and how these disparities are currently playing out. Specifically, I keep going back to my field, but it's just kind of what you do. Everything looks like a nail to a hammer. It is imperative that we do continue to listen to Native communities and fund these endeavors that are increasingly incorporating culture into our medicine, into our clinics, and just making health more integrated. I think, even if you look at Western medicine in the kind of setup that we currently have, there's neurology, there's psychiatry, there's surgery, there's family med. We can be very siloed. We can be very much focused on this person handles this problem, this person handles this problem. And sure, there's strengths and there's pluses and minuses to that. But increasingly what we're seeing, and honestly even the way medicine is moving, is towards a more integrated kind of health network. And tribes have been trying to do that for a number of years now by incorporating traditional medicine practices into what we view now as Western medicine. I would say continuing to prioritize these community voices and continuing to trust that these communities know what's best and know kind of how to target their population and how to really kind of make that change. It's going to be different in each community, and I think that's where people in my field get a little leery because we want something that is, a fit all to everyone. We want to have a model that we say, here's what we did, we hand it off to you, you do the same thing, and it's going to work. And that's not how it works in Native communities. In addressing these disparities, we're going to really need to listen to each communities on an individual basis. That's just the reality.
And it's got to be not only just the whole person, so the physical, mental, spiritual, emotional, but it's got to be throughout the lifespan. So thinking about prenatal care, when you look at some of the health data, as early as infant mortality rates, child death rate, all of those for Native youth are for Native people are you start out life already behind the 8 ball, and so having a holistic approach where you're looking at prenatal care, early infant care, all of those things need to sort of come into play, and bringing the people with the expertise to address the challenges at those different stages of life is so very important. So that's
Great. Maybe we should have a round of applause for our panelists before we open this up. Thank you so much. And if people have questions, I think Jason might run around with the microphone perhaps to.
We know CLPs usually only run about an hour long. So if you're a student and you need to be somewhere, you can go ahead and take this time to step out. But if not, we would like to open up for questions.
Can you speak loudly, or do you want a microphone?
So for those, if there are people online, the question is for changing administration about comments regarding vaccine efficacy and just general public health attitude shifting, if I'm getting that correctly. It's worrisome. And, I talked with some colleagues at Yale yesterday. It can't, there's no way to sugarcoat it. For a lot of us in public health and within our field, our job is, it can become increasingly harder, but our mission stays the same. We as clinicians, as educators, I don't know, is there anybody out there who speaks Latin? No? Anybody know what doctor is Latin for? Docere, to teach. Part of your job as a physician, as a doctor, whether you're a PhD, an MD, a PsyD, your job is to teach, and it's to teach what's evidence-based, what's real. So our position doesn't change. We're still going to go by science. We're still going to go by data, and we're going to do our best to educate the masses however we can, whether that includes us, having to publish more, having to go on podcasts more. Where people get their sources of trusted data may change, but where how our process is going to be and what our job is not changing.
And it'll be interesting to see, depending on where things go after January 20, whatever. So you have in health service, you have the NIH Office of Tribal Health. You have there's the Office of Minority Health. So there are a lot of agencies who have this focus on the health of Native populations, and so it would be interesting to see how if a directive like that came out, how would it affect what Indian Health Service, what their policies are, what the the Office of Minority Health, all of those. So I would hope that there wouldn't be this top-down directive, but it's a strange new world we live in.
I also think your point about uptake of COVID vaccines in the community really relied on local experts, and that was true in all communities, right? We tended to listen not to necessarily the scientists as a population, but rather to people that we knew, and so that's an important thing to remember as we're going forward and communicating information to people. Yeah. Is there another question? Yeah.
Yeah, and as you can imagine, this is going to vary a lot between different tribes and different communities, regional basis, that sort of thing. There's a lot of different customs for, my community in particular, like even just around like what would be like a traditional like funeral and how long that lasts and how long your mourning period is supposed to last. In our cosmology stories, there is this idea of an afterlife. It's called Sewa Anya, and for us, it's this place basically where like you're finally allowed to rest, you're tranquil with family, and it's almost thought of as a more, I want to call it fluid idea, because you go through different periods of life where like you're living, but you don't feel alive. You don't feel like you're kind of experiencing things to the fullest. I would say that like in our kind of thinking of it, death it's not so permanent and it's not so fixed. There's kind of a lot more fluidity to it, if that makes any sense. As I mentioned, it's going to vary quite a bit between different communities, even just like customarily from ceremonial like death practices and that sort of thing. Do you mean and let me just rephrase the question so if I'm understanding it. So gender differences in like health outcomes or like health career, like both? Okay. Okay. So I have one that's like, I think key to point out. I'm blanking on who the source for this is. I'll remember it. This was kind of a recent study where they broke up the not only ethnic differences in outcomes of drug overdose, but also gender differences. And when you tease out the data in the way that they did, what comes out on the male side is African American males and Native American males have the highest rates of overdose over the last few years. And it's like neck and neck, like right next to each other. The reason the data I think is kind of flawed is when you look at it from just including both men and women in the sample, Native women have a far and away way higher rate of drug overdose compared to all other ethnic groups of females. And why that is, there's a host of theories and reasons out there, but all to say that there's an extensive amount of like concern over adverse childhood experiences in Native communities and just traumas that occur overwhelmingly like for Native women and the risk that Native women have for like domestic abuse, for victimization of crimes and that sort of thing. That's one of the leading theories as to why someone ends up in that situation. As far as healthcare careers. Generally, from what I remember in the data, Native women tend to be more educated. It's something that I've seen even just like in data that I've reviewed for specifically for physicians and for MDs. My med school was a little was kind of really imbalanced in this way actually, where I think the vast majority of our whole class was actually female. I want to say it was like 60 or 70%, and it had been shifting in that way for a while, and Native women in general have kind of followed with that trend, and that they're pursuing education further than males. Does that answer your question, or answer some of your question?
I think there, I mean, you have to consider that in a lot of Native societies, they are sort of matriarchal. So oftentimes the women are held in high regard, but we do see these statistics on domestic violence and substance use and things like that. So I think there has to be some intentionality in getting Native women into STEM fields, into the health profession. So I think that has to be sort of built into whatever systems are put into place to sort of build that pipeline.
All right. Not seeing any additional hands. Jason's making his way to the podium.
Well, that is about all the time we have. Thank you so much all for coming. I see lots of friends, classmates, professors, and my family over there. We love the support. And once again, thank you to the Institute for the Advancement of Community Health, the Riley Institute, the Sociology Department, and Dr. Maher, Religion Department, and Dr. Turner, and our Health Sciences Department for helping make this event happen. It really means a lot to us as a group to allow us to share our culture with you and try to help you learn something new. And thank you once again to our speakers, Dr. Bell and Dr. Moreno. Let's give them one last round of applause.